Welcome to Uncle Sefra's Storytime. We're going to talk about the FNAF lore from start to finish, I guess. I'm going to preface this by saying a lot of intermediary information I have comes from probably Dawko. So, where do we start? The hardest thing with discussing FNAF lore is that there's the game order, and then there's the actual timeline order, which is completely out of whack. Gosh, the first game is probably like the fourth or fifth game in the actual timeline. I'll try and lay that out by the time we get to the end of this, but let's just start there at the beginning with Five Nights at Freddy's 1. There's not really a lot to unpack with the first game. Most of the lore was shoved off onto the side into some little notes on the wall that randomly appeared in the camera feed. Once you'd sort of collected all that, you kind of got a picture for what was actually going on. That it wasn't just, okay, the animatronics are buggy, weird things that try to kill you for no apparent reason, but that they're actually haunted, presumably, because at the time we can only assume, but the lore seems to more or less solidify over time that at the very least, these four animatronics and the Golden Freddy suit are haunted as shit. Because the owner of the pizzeria, who is not named until Sister Location, five games down the line, but he's basically just known as, I guess he wasn't even until the second game that we even had the purple guy. Yeah, so, but that's basically where we go to, is, for starters, all we know is that somebody in management lured these kids off to a back room, murdered them, the bodies were never found, he was apparently arrested, but as we inevitably will come to find out at some point, or else just determine at some point, he gets off on these charges because they don't have any definitive evidence that he was responsible, partially because they could never find the bodies. The bodies, of course, were stuffed into the animatronic suits. That's why there are reports of them smelling, and various other grisly details that were occasionally mentioned in these things. And by process of association, I suppose, the spirits of these dead children haunt the animatronics. And you, being the only person there at night, and wearing an outfit which is presumably purple, and matching what we would come to know as the purple guy later on, the man that killed the children, basically just by association, they think you're the person that killed them. That's why they keep trying to get into your office and fucking murder you. Like, everything else is just like a cover story to give you an impression that, oh, it's just some weird thing with these weird, creepy animatronics that are going to stuff you. No, they're haunted by vengeful spirits of the children that were murdered, and you resemble the person that killed them. So they're trying to murder you for 5 to 6 nights. You are ultimately fired from the job because you smell and were tampering with the animatronics. These are points which will come back later, but I should preface now that I've heard a very lengthy interview between Dawko and Scott Cawthorn, the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's. There was no, like, super long-term plan for all the lore. You know, this stuff has all been made up as they go and retconned as necessary, etc. As you do with long-term stories like this, especially in the fucking horror genre. So, presumably at the start, that's all there was. It was just, that was the basic outline for what was going on, and it's just developed over time. So, a lot of this explanation is going to be me having to stop and rectify in my head what details aren't available yet, and then recap when they do become relevant. So, just for that relevant status, let's go ahead and move on to the next game, because otherwise I'm going to get caught up in everything, and there's not much else I can say about the first game. There really isn't. At least not without covering more of the games. So, FNAF 2, you're in a new location. Everything about the pre-recorded, very important, pre-recorded phone calls would lead one to suspect this is a new establishment sometime after the events of the first game. And it's not until you reach the end, basically, that it becomes apparent that, oh, no, this game predates the first. So even though everything looks newer, and you've got all of the run-down versions of the animatronics from the first game in this establishment, this is actually a prequel. The weird thing is, I can actually probably tell you why the newer animatronics look better despite being older animatronics than what appear in the first game. But we'll just have to get there. So we've got the puppet. We've got what seems to be a lead-up story to the first game's fabled Bite of 87, which has never really been confirmed nor necessarily denied as to whether or not that winds up happening at the end of FNAF 2. I think realistically it doesn't, just because I know who the main character of this series is, which, again, we'll just have to come back to. But between knowing what I know about the main character and knowing that the phone calls are pre-recorded, I believe by the time of the game itself, the Bite of 87 probably did happen directly following the events described in the phone calls as like the day party the next day that whoever was working the night shift was supposed to be swapped to. That probably did lead directly into the Bite of 87, but not quite yet, I suppose, the closing of the establishment. That's sort of me playing off some assumptions. Either way, the character you are playing as is not the Bite of 87 victim. That's where I draw the line there. Because again, all these messages were pre-recorded. You're just hearing them because they're being played for you. Like, these would be played for anyone coming in to have your new job, because management is lazy and irresponsible. That's the best way I can put it. So now you've also got the puppet, and you've got all these death mini-games. And I think was that also the one where you had the in-between things of your Freddy in the old / actually new establishment? I feel like it was. Yeah. It's such a mess. It's such a mess. What the death minigames wind up doing is effectively establishing the purple guy, and that I suppose all of your animatronics are free roaming by nature, and that in a sense they probably have been trying to get this guy for a while, but he's always one step ahead of them. And to some extent I would suggest that's why the original 4 are all as messed up as they are in the parts and services room. Just because, again, they were the first things that were used, they were left to rot, and then later they just get refurbished, and I guess the person refurbishing them didn't look inside very well. I don't fucking know. This story is full of plot holes if you think about it too much. So whatever happens, presumably the Bite of 87. This place ends up getting shut down. It's kind of pointed out during one of the death mini games that the puppet is responsible for bringing the children back to life, in a manner of speaking. This isn't initially explained how. That doesn't come till literally the last fucking game. And that somehow the puppet basically just attached the children's spirits to these animatronics they've been stuffed in and brought them back to life so that they wouldn't really die. Like, the puppet is basically trying to save the children, but it's stupid, right? That's basically how I would say that goes, because obviously it has instead prescribed them to a life of eternal torment trapped inside this fucking animatronic. presumably trying to gain revenge for their untimely demise, and just never quite being able to manage it. Because the purple guy's always one step ahead, and just keeps doing his fucking thing, apparently, because nobody's been able to catch him, and he's become a cocky, arrogant bastard, I guess, is the way to look at that. On the paychecks, you're called Jeremy Fitzgerald, and during the custom night, you're called Fritz Smith. I feel like this is an element that was effectively retconned in some capacity, just to make up for facts later on, so we'll come back to that too. Otherwise, I don't have a very good excuse for why it's two different people, and they're separate from the Mike Schmidt in the first game, whose name was on the paycheck. They've repeatedly obfuscated the name of whoever it is behind the desk, possibly so it can be retconned later. Who knows? You know, this was like I said, work in progress storyline. So let me try and move on before I get stuck in a causality loop. Five Nights at Freddy's 3, the end of the trilogy, which actually does take place in the future, like some 15 years or so after the events of the first game. And some dumbass has been like, hey, I'm a fan of these old restaurants, so I've set up a horror attraction based on, you know, the spooky, scary stories surrounding its nature over time. About all the hauntings or whatever, I guess, because apparently there were stories of the hauntings. I don't fucking know. Anyways, this idiot has set up a big place with all these things as a horror attraction, which doesn't make any fucking sense, but let's just roll with it, alright? You've been brought on as a security guard for the horror attraction. This literally makes less sense than the night shift at the restaurant, but okay, let's just roll with this and move right along. So, new phone guy, phone dude, or whatever, informs you that on your first night, after telling you how everything works in this new location, we found something, we think. We're going to check it out and bring it back in tomorrow, and we hope it's something cool. Turns out, they'd found out about a secret room in the back of one of the old locations, which I'm pretty sure is implied to be the FNAF 1 location. And sealed in a room back there is a functional animatronic suit, which has just been sort of left to rot. And they've brought it back. They've set it up. They've clearly made the incredibly bright decision of powering it back on so it can move and shit. Whatever that entails, because we have no idea what sort of battery these things are supposed to be running off of. But I guess they're Energizer Infinite Bunny batteries, because otherwise I don't fucking know how these things keep moving around as long as they do without getting, you know, recharged periodically. I don't know. So they bring that back, they set it up in their office, and then this guy just fucks off, right? We never hear from this idiot again. He leaves us some more tapes that they found from original phone guy, who's recording messages for people working in the spring suits, which is the first time we're introduced to the concept necessarily of a spring lock suit, which is both animatronic and suit, okay? You know, so instead of having like individual cleaned out suits, like you go to a Chuck E. Cheese and there's the mascot walking around in the Chuck E. Cheese suit, and that's completely separate from the Chuck E. Cheese robot on the stage. Instead, they said, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we could cut corners and just crank some screws and stuff so that all of the mechanical parts and things that this thing needs to move as an animatronic would just kind of fold back in on themselves and spring lock into place, so that a person could then get inside the robot suit and move around as a character in this. We'll just combine these two things together and nothing could possibly go wrong. Despite the fact that every part of the operation manual warning that phone guy gives you basically says doing literally fucking anything inside of this suit could cause the entire fucking lock system to fail and end your life more or less instantly as you are crushed to death by animatronic parts. Yet they decided to go along with this idea anyways because management is garbage. Granted, as we, again, management is basically purple guy, I guess, and he doesn't give a shit. There is more to that story, but again, further down the line, this is all we have now, is that management thought this would be a great fucking idea, and so here we go. Inevitably leading to one of the final phone calls being like, yeah, so we've decided the spring lock suits, we're going to stop using those ever, because we've had like 2 failures at a sister location. LOL, title drop for suit future thing. So we're just not going to use those anymore because they are exceptionally deadly, and I guess we can't deny this fact anymore, so we're going to stop using them. Anyways, all that out of the way, the suit they brought back obviously was a spring lock suit. It is the Spring Bonnie suit, which has been aptly named Spring Trap. He is the only adversary of the game. Everything else is a hallucination had by the person doing the night shift, which is obviously meant to imply, more or less directly, that this person has relevant experience with the FNAF animatronics in order to be having these hallucinations to begin with. Furthermore, that he would have to have been some degree of previously terrified by them in the past in order for them to be haunting them in the manner that they appear to be. Which basically just meant to imply that maybe this guy is one of the night guards from one of the 2 previous games. Could be either one or 3, because Jeremy and Fritz, whatever. It's all up in the air at this point. It could be fucking anybody. It could be just a kid who was a child and really didn't fucking like these things and now is chosen to be the night guard at this fucking attraction for some stupid reason to face his fears. I don't fucking know. Anyways, through a series of mini games in between stages, we basically come to find out that the purple guy has gone back to basically the FNAF 1 location at some point in time, presumably after he got arrested and subsequently released. And I believe the implication is that he's attempting to cover up any of the remaining evidence by destroying the animatronics. So he lures them off to the back room, which we learn from the tapes that that this back room is invisible to the animatronics. They can't see it, they can't go back there. It's not inside their programming. This is also why the animatronics never leave the pizzerias, because they've basically been programmed that this is the area that exists, nothing else exists. So why would you go beyond it, I guess? Programming parameters, AI parameters, whatever you want to call it. The fact that these things are being haunted doesn't seem to necessarily matter in that instance. Well, especially just because of what happens in FNAF 3, where this thing's obviously haunted and wants to kill you, but it keeps getting lured away by the sounds of children in other rooms, and that's how you move him around and keep him away from you, is by having him chase all these sounds. Because even though there's that consciousness there, it's still bound, more or less, to the parameters of the animatronic that it's inhabiting. So whatever the animatronic is programmed to do kind of winds up taking priority over what the spirit actually wants, which is also partly, I suppose, how the purple guy stays ahead of the animatronics that were trying to kill him all this time, because he knows how to shut them down or disable them or whatever. And these nightly mini games show quite clearly that he can obviously outsmart and overpower them. He destroys all 4 of the main animatronics, and then in the final night, he is visited by the spirit of a child, who is obviously presumed to be Golden Freddy, because he's the only of the original 5 that hasn't shown up. And we know that Golden Freddy is a thing, even though it is extremely enigmatic in nature throughout the series. It just kind of is. It goes to the area that that the purple man had been hiding out. It goes in, is apparently visible to the purple guy because it freaks him the fuck out. Maybe this is intended to imply that he actually appears in the Golden Freddy suit, but that isn't really implied, so I think it's just he actually sees the spirit of the child. It freaks him out. The other 4 spirits from the destroyed animatronic show up as like a matter of support and to like block him in the room. He pops into the Spring Bonnie suit. There's a reason for this. Several reasons, presumably. But, again, first reason is, as we find out at some point, so I'm just going to say we find it out now because fuck it. The Spring Bonnie suit is the suit that he'd been wearing to lure the children into the back room to begin with in order to murder them. So this is basically his disguise he's been using the entire time to go about doing all of these murders. So I believe the implication then is that he gets into the suit because he either expects it to confuse or frighten the children, because they would then see it as either their friend, another animatronic that they're friends with, because all the animatronics don't fight each other, so he must be one of them, or B, just to remind them of this is what killed you and frighten them off. And he thinks he's invincible in the suit because, he basically has been this whole time. And whoops, it's been raining. This suit has been out of use for an extended period of time. You just hopped into it in a hurry without taking a lot of time or attention to all the safety procedures. And then you started, laughing, jerking, moving around in it. Spring lock failure. He's murdered his shit inside the suit, collapsed, dead. But because of all the nonsense involved in the series, he comes back haunting the animatronic. And now he was in a sealed room that nobody's ever going to fucking find. So he just sat there alone for like 15 years until these idiots came and found him. Maybe he killed them after he turned them on. That'd be great. Probably not, but they probably just went on with their lives, whatever. But I like to imagine he just killed them, because fuck those people. Fucking idiots sometimes just deserve to die. So now he's roaming the hall of this place, and you have to keep him the fuck out. Simple enough. By the end of the 5 nights, I guess your player character has decided, okay, I've had enough of this shit, and he burns the place down. Only we find out in the post-credits, more or less, that by brightening some image, you can see Springtrap still clearly having survived the place burning down, and that he is therefore still at large. Dun dun dun. The other important part of FNAF 3 was all these little mini games you could uncover through various hints and things in the previous in the mini games that you always see, and completing certain tasks in them effectively led you to the Happiest Day Minigame, this birthday minigame where you deliver cake to the spirit of the children, most specifically to the child that inhabits Golden Freddy, as this character seems to have the most relevant impact on the series, despite there being so little known about them. It seems to be implied that the puppet is guiding these machinations, though it could just as well be Golden Freddy guiding the machinations himself. But I say that entirely because of FNAF World, and we'll get there later. But if you complete all these minigames successfully, then when you finish the game, where previously there had been this lineup of the 4 original animatronic heads with the lights still on in their eyes, and sort of suggesting that they're still there, they're still haunted, the lights are out instead. It seems like there might have even been a Golden Freddy head in the background that you could see at that point, which was also out, suggesting that through your actions inside this location, you had managed to calm and free the spirits of these trapped children, and effectively gotten them a happy ending finally, even if their murderer was still wound up technically at large after you tried to burn him to death and failed, with your own fate then unknown. The biggest problem I have with this ending is that it's, you have to work for that ending. It's an alternate ending. So a seemingly important question to ask at this juncture is, which is the true ending? Is it the good ending, or the, for lack of better terms, bad ending? And according to the interview I listened to with Scott, he said that he does know which of those 2 endings is the canon true ending, but he's not going to say, because basically just the way the fandom is and all their speculations and the way they deviate timelines from this or the other. I guess partially just because it would be telling you and removing the mystery of, well, is it this or is it that? And you know, like, it would cause too much drama to actually reveal the answer, which is kind of dumb and annoying. But okay, so we don't know. That's just how it goes. We don't know which ending, the animatronics still being possessed or the animatronics no longer being possessed at the end of FNAF 3 is the canon ending. So take your pick. Take your fucking pick. I assume it kind of resolves itself either way in FNAF 6, but we'll just have to be confused over it until then. All right. So that was the end of the series. So we thought. I thought it was a perfectly fine wrap up to the series, but I guess not, because then we got FNAF 4. Okay. Which also called itself FNAF 4, The Final Chapter. LOLOL, LOL, LOLOL. Because not only was it not the final chapter, but by all accounts, it is the first fucking chapter. Because as far as the timeline is concerned, this happens before literally anything else in the game series up to this point. And I'm pretty sure it happens before everything in the game series after this point in release. So, yeah, lols. The final chapter is actually a super prequel. Alright, so, FNAF 4. For all intents and purposes, I'm just going to blow this out of the water now. For all intents and purposes, all these nightmare animatronics and the things that happen over the course of this game, because you're effectively a child in your bedroom at night fending off animatronics, and that doesn't make any damn sense. And then during the day, more or less, you're having these mini games where you're playing as a crying child who is clearly terrified of these animatronics for reasons which are not fully described to us at this time. I think he saw Baby do what Baby did. That'll come up later. And this child seems to have a very troubled life, both home life and going to Freddy's life. Like, he clearly doesn't like the animatronics, yet he likes the characters because he has plush dolls of all of them and considers them his friends. Except, I guess, for Foxy, whose head he has ripped off. Though, considering some other elements of this story, we could assume there are reasons for that, and he may not have even been the one responsible for it. His older brother, who is clearly a fan of Foxy, and also clearly knows that these things frighten his younger brother, makes a point of constantly tormenting him and scaring the living daylights out of him while wearing a Foxy mask. Yay for responsible big brothers. We are also given the implication, just by how often they are present at the Fazbear Pizzeria and how close they live to the building, that whoever their parents are, we never see them, more than likely work for the establishment. There are also some implications that something has either occurred with either a mother or sister character, just because there's a ripped to shreds Funtime Foxy plush in a clearly girl's room, which, also hints at Mangle, but Mangle wouldn't exist by this point, so it's just kind of a thing. And by the end of this long, drawn-out series of events where, he's constantly talking to this Fredbear plush, which seems to just magically fucking follow him. I'm not sure what the implications of that are meant to be, but let's just say we're supposed to accept the fact that he's bringing this plush around with him, and that's why he's talking to it and can hear it talk, etc. So again, he clearly trusts the characters. He just doesn't trust the animatronics. He's seen something, we're never told what, and that's just sort of amplified his fear. And then his brother isn't making it any better by scaring the living daylights out of him every single day, by popping out at him in the Foxy mask to jump scare him, LOL. And at the end of this sequence of events, on his birthday no less, his brother and their group of friends pick him up, introduce him to the Fredbear, which is basically Golden Freddy, introduce him to Fredbear, way up close, and chomp, crushes the kid's fucking head, and would seem to imply just flat murdered him there. You did all the extra stuff, extra bonus ending stuff indicates that the child did survive the bite, but was hospitalized for an extended period of time. This is also implied through various times during the game where you would turn around and there would be like flowers or an IV bag hanging next to your bed. Of course, this also wound up leading people to suspect that this entire part of the game was either from that child's perspective or was a dream. Either way, just because, well, yeah, it was expected to be that this was all a dream or a hallucination in general, just because, I mean, A, it didn't make any fucking sense to some extent, and B, just how the nightmare animatronics looked, how Foxy's mechanic with the closet worked, how if you shut it enough times, then he just became a fucking doll on the ground. Like, this is all just in your head. So yeah, the prevailing thought for this whole thing was that this was all just like a dream, an hallucination, the last dying breaths of this child trying to fight off his nightmares before ultimately succumbing. Turns out this was not the case. I feel like I'll get back to that in a very short amount of time, so I'm just going to pin that there. And otherwise, it is implied that this young child dies, I guess, on life support. There are implications, however, that one person says, "I will put you back together." It's not implied necessarily who. There's some weird wonkiness with the color of the text and all this other nonsense and implications. So fuck if I necessarily know. But a long-term, all theory encompassing element seems to suggest that this child would have lived, but someone took him off life support. That's someone more or less likely to be the purple guy, and the purple guy is more or less likely to have been his father. Yay, all the connections are coming together. But we'll get back to that and just, because again, like, the purple guy doesn't seem to even show up in this game, except for one moment during those mini games where if you backtracked, you could see him putting an employee in a springlock suit for like Fredbear, and then he shuts the door and you don't see him anymore. But it shows that he was there even at that time, and that he appeared to be security, and obviously knew how the fucking springlock suits worked if he was putting someone in them. It's debatable whether you want to say that was an employee he was putting in there to go out for a show, or if he was stuffing a child in there, but either way, he was there. That's the important bit. And yeah, all the implications appear to be that the crying child and his asshole brother were the children of the purple guy. That's more or less been canonified at this point, I believe. And to some extent, potentially the motivations for why he's such an asshole, because these animatronics killed his children. But we'll come back to that. I wrote at this point that I had to make a necessary pause. I think that's because now we have to discuss FNAF World, and I want to interlude into the 3 books, this short novel series that was released as a tie-in thing. I'm not going to say a lot about FNAF World, because FNAF World is its own little monster, and ultimately the lore of FNAF World doesn't tie in too directly to the main series. If you follow effectively the secret objective of finding all the clocks and doing the clock minigame stuff, what that turns out to be is setting up the hints for the minigames in FNAF 3 so that you could find the path to the Happiest Day good ending, and you're directed to do this under the direction of Golden Freddy. So there are implications that FNAF World, as it existed, was this sort of like digital sanctuary for, I guess, the souls of the lost children inside of the animatronics, where they just sort of went to I guess, have fun or something. Like, there's some implications of that. And it's some weird fantastical purgatory that they go to when they're not trying to murder you in your office. But I can really neither confirm nor deny that, because FNAF World is just kind of its own weird little thing. And apart from the clock's ending, doesn't directly tie into absolutely fucking anything. Does have a really beautiful tie-in teaser that basically announced sister location, which was pretty neat, but that's not really necessarily a canon thing either. So, I don't know. FNAF World is a very self-referential meta concept thing, which should just be taken as it is, and I don't know that I would really tie it too deeply into anything. Like, the only other thing that came from that that's shown up since is like Lolbit, which I think has shown back up entirely because their name is Lolbit, and that's hilarious, I guess. The other detour I need to make at this point is to the Silver Eyes, the first of the book series. Now, the important thing to note about the book series as a whole is that they are their own canon. They're completely separate from the game series. Still, a number of concepts were introduced in the book series that wound up being directly related to the lore of the main game series. The most important of which being Henry, I don't remember his last name, so I'm just going to say Henry, and William Afton. These two are noted as partners who opened the Five Nights, who opened the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria franchise. Henry is the man responsible for building the original animatronics. It even the Silver Eyes from the title literally refers to Foxy, because his animatronic was kind of weird and jerky from the start, even before it was haunted or anything. So there was always something a little off about Foxy. Lulz. But, Henry was a good person. He loved children. He made all these great inventions. And then Michael Afton was like the corporate end of things. He was the one that saw money in it, And, he basically used Henry to stole his designs in the long run to make his own animatronic line, which are effectively the toy animatronics, I think is what's basically to be pulled from that, as well as I think it's reasonable to suggest that William Afton winds up being responsible for every animatronic that wasn't the original 4. I think that's a safe bet to make. Or 5, if you want to count Golden Freddy, even though we've never seen his actual animatronic half, excluding that cutscene with the bite. Golden Freddy is Fredbear, by the way, if I haven't made that fucking point at this point. Fredbear was like the main character before Freddy came along as well. So, that's relevant, but not super important. That would explain, though, why it was originally called Fredbear's Family Diner, and then was later shifted to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Presumably the diner is where the bite happened, but again, I don't fucking know. All of this is, so much of this is implied information that no matter what, you have to draw your own conclusions to. So just, anyways, William Afton, he's fun. He's basically responsible for everything that went wrong. And again, this is just where they first showed up, but these names then came back, first in Sister Location and then in Pizza Simulator. Henry shows up in that. But William Afton first turns up in Sister Location, canonically, and then comes back in Pizza Simulator. William Afton is the purple guy. He's the killer. He is responsible for everything. Most of the animatronics that he designed actually were directly designed for the express purpose of killing children. Why? I don't know. Maybe he's just a bastard. Regardless, now that this is where he first canonically shows up. His name first canonically shows up in this book, which is non-canon to the fucking game series. But all these concepts are relevant, so this is where it comes back to. And that's the only reason I've stopped here to bring up the Silver Eyes, because this is where it all basically comes together and establishes that William Afton is the name of the purple guy. He is the villain. He is responsible for basically fucking everything. William Afton is the purple guy. He's now Springtrap. We can move on from there. And then prior to Springtrap, he was just, being a dickhead. And yet, because now as we move into sister location, I can start laying this shit out. Of course, there's one other thing from the books I wanted to bring out, and I think it's from the second one. At some point in the second one, they had basically ran into some sort of technology that Afton was using, which was basically just like a sound record playing, and it caused fucking hallucinations. So that they were seeing all these animatronics, because that was one of the twisted ones, right? So it had all these twisted animatronics that looked way dirtier and creepy, etc., to the protagonists of the book. But they were supposed to make them look friendlier and more attractive so that people would approach the animatronics and could then get grabbed, spring-locked, whatever, murdered by the animatronic. So it was supposed to have been an attraction system. But to people who have had extremely negative experiences with these animatronics, they were instead having the reverse reaction. So instead of seeing something pleasant, they were seeing something nightmarish. Which, while again, these books are considered non-canon, and this hasn't really come up in any of the games, that could be viewed as one of the things that is making, especially in the case of like the nightmare animatronics, makes them so fucking frightening. Like, it's entirely possible that those things were running on a similar technology, and you were supposed to have been, they were like going into kids' houses or something, I guess, and were supposed to be attracting the children to come to the door and see the animatronics so that they could be kidnapped or whatever. Killed, kidnapped, whichever. And since the person you're playing as in FNAF 4 has had a horrific experience, they instead see them as nightmares. Again, this is pulling a lot out of my ass based on something that's supposed to be non-canon, but it fits, so I'm rolling with it. Because again, as we now roll into sister location, in sister location, due to the map layout, it comes to the player's attention that we are in the exact same location that FNAF 4 occurred in. Like, the building, the pizzeria is there, the house is there, the room where you fought off the animatronics is there, the room where you kept Spring Plush Trap on the fucking chairs there. All this shit is there as basically either above or as a part of this animatronics building facility that is the sister location. Now, technically, according to the lore, as it was leading up to the game, the sister location was actually supposed to have been an actual establishment called like Circus Baby's Pizza World, and you could rent animatronics from this location for like birthday parties and whatnot off-site. They would just like deliver you the things, and that sort of thing. Like when you have a fucking clown come to your birthday party. And considering Baby looks like a clown and sort of in terms of modeling structure, that kind of fits. But this establishment was supposedly shut down due to a gas leak. I think it was actually shut down because of what happens with Baby, and William Afton had a fucking panic attack and shut everything down. Because again, as we come to learn into regards to all the sister location animatronics from special screens that show up from time to time, all the sister animatronics were built by William Afton, and their special features are clearly specifically designated for the purpose and intent of enticing, catching alone, and basically trapping, kidnapping children for presumable murder later. Yeah, because like Freddy was the containment unit, Ballora was the distraction unit, and Foxy was... she might have also been a distraction. I don't fucking know. It's like one of them was focused on hearing sounds in order to tell when people are around, and the other was like lights. So they were detection units. They responded to different things, and they were supposed to keep people's attention and draw them one way or another, whereas Baby seemed to be the one that like counted the children, because in her story she winds up saying at some point one of the children wound up alone with her she offered them ice cream, that child be dead. More importantly with that story is that we're also given little dialogue snippets here and there suggesting that this child liked the baby animatronic, wanted to go interact with it, and her father was all, no, stay away. This isn't meant for you. It is also determined by the sound of that voice, and the one that we'd been told earlier that that voice was William Afton, that this is his daughter. So, whoops, his creation killed his fucking daughter. I feel like that probably had an effect on him and made him a little crazier than he clearly already fucking was. So this operation basically was shut down, it was moving underground, and now, based on the fact that when you first meet her, Baby says, I've seen this simulation before, means that you're not the first technician to be brought down here to work on the animatronics, meaning these are clearly no longer being used just to murder children, but also just, fuck it, we'll kill adults too because we can get away with it, I guess. And so she actually is kind of helping you to not get murdered, while at the same time just pretending to do so in order to pursue her own agenda. Because the story of Sister Location is the most linear story in any of the games. It's very straightforward. It basically tells you point by point what is actually fucking going on. There's still a lot of things to interpret, but the game otherwise flows forward very straightforward, very linear, as opposed to 5 nights of the same thing. You're doing 5 different activities each night, and the story just kind of follows what you're doing. You also don't know what the name of your character is because it's a simulation. It doesn't care what your name is. It's fucking with you. Basically, everything that the helper unit tells you to do is bullshit. It is trying to get you killed by telling you the wrong information. Baby tells you the correct information so that you won't fucking die. Which, again, is basically why you wind up trusting her. Which, in the end, turns out to have been a bad idea, because what she wanted you to do was to follow her instructions, walk into the scooping room, get your ass fucking murdered, just bludgeoned to death effectively in one shot from this horrible machine designed to scoop the animatronic guts out of the animatronic shells. This probably put a giant fucking hole in your chest. Baby and her collection of the rest of the animatronics she's bound herself together with whoops themselves up into your body and sneak out of the location. Because they couldn't sneak out on their own, they'd be caught. But now that they're inside you, nobody notices. Whoopsie-doo. So, this then has an ominous ending thing where it shows a guy in a security uniform looking in a mirror, and they appear very purple. Which initially seemed to indicate that this was the fucking purple guy, and that this was then Baby that had been responsible for all the murders and everything. This was not the intention to be pulled from, and Scott wound up having to sort of, I guess, rectify that in the bonus content for the custom night that came out for Sister Location later on. So let me backtrack and better explain this. The character you're playing as in Sister Location is Michael Afton, not William, Michael, William's son. More specifically, his oldest son. More specifically, that shit little kid in the foxy mask that was jump scaring his scared little brother in FNAF 4. At this point, I can definitively then tell you that over the course of all 5 of these games, you have been playing as Michael Afton. This is A, why he took the jobs to begin with in the first 3 games, and B, why they were trying to kill him, more specifically because he looks like his father, and his father murdered all these fucking children. The purpleness is then explained as basically, as far as Michael himself is concerned, as Baby and these animatronics walking around in his body for so long, his body decomposed, his skin turned purple, which kind of makes sense. I think it would have actually been blue, but fuck it, we're not going to go into semantics. But at some point over time, that body finally rejected the animatronics inside of it, and they were ejected from the body. And that's where he probably should have died if he wasn't already dead. But due to the weird nature of all of these hauntings, and because like the baby animatronic and all those were also haunted, but the animatronic programming was more in charge because they'd been programmed to kill children from the get-go, and they were just evil incarnate from the fucking start. So they were probably suppressing the children that were haunting those animatronics, but they're all still also were haunted. So now Michael is effectively haunting his own zombified corpse. That's why he's purple. That's why he smells. And all the little check taglines where he gets fired due to odor. And so now what we basically come to find out is since Sister Location, he has been the one at every one of these locations, presumably trying to, I guess just because of how it winds up ending in Pizza Simulator, I believe and how the ending of Sister Location's Custom Night, once you beat the final challenge, the implication seems to be that he's been going to these locations and trying to free the spirits that are attached to these animatronics. That seems to be the implication. And he's basically just failing a lot until he finally succeeds in the end, I guess. And maybe in FNAF 3 if the good ending is canon, but we don't know. They also show this at the end of the Sister Location Custom Night things by actually showing the burnt out FNAF 3 location and having Springtrap reactivate at the final moment of the scene, following the lines from Michael saying, "I'm coming to find you," indicating he's looking for his father. He wants to fucking finish this. He wants to put it all to rest, which is pretty neat. I mean, that was like the best twist in the series so far, was just that you've been playing as Michael this whole fucking time. And it confuses some things in FNAF 4 with the Nightmare animatronics, but also makes them a little more understandable, because it suggests that A, he was the child at the time. He would have, at that point, having done to his brother what happened to his little brother, he would understand that these things are bad. I need to stay the fuck away from them. Why he was in that situation specifically, I don't know. He could have been messing with his father. His father could have been messing with him, because his father's a fucking lunatic. And has already lost at this point 2 of his children to his own fucking animatronics. Well, arguably the one, Fredbear, might have been Henry's animatronic. Still, he's lost 2 children now to animatronics. One to Baby, which is his own fucking fault, and one to Fredbear and his own incompetent. Because again, it's implied that that child would have lived, but it is then implied that in an effort to try and fix things, he pulled the plug on the life support. And because of that, that child is Golden Freddy. Whoopsie-doo. So Michael's sister is haunting Baby, his brother is haunting Golden Freddy, and his father is haunting Springtrap and is responsible for all of this. That's probably the most important part of this whole fucking plot dump. Is just, who have you been playing as this entire fucking time? It's kind of hilarious. Alright. The one last thing to cover is the secret room, where in the non-canon ending, you can escape from Baby in the last night by going into the secret room and then fending her off all day. There is a panel on the wall where if you put in the right code, which I think was just like 1983, which is what popped up on the TV in FNAF 4 as the date. Put that in and it activates the monitors on the desk, which show the rooms from FNAF 4 from a different angle. Like someone has been watching this room. And we already know that this setup is part of this location, just off-site slightly. So this is like another testing ground where he's been murdering children with the Nightmare animatronics, or just testing the Nightmare animatronics after bringing children in who've been, I don't know, gassed or something. Fuck if I know. Which again leads me to question slightly if FNAF 4 happened before. I guess, yeah, it basically had to have happened before Sister Location, because he would have had to have grown up into more of an adult before he'd have gotten a job to as a technician to go and work. So yeah, that still pans out, whatever. Again, why he was getting dumped into the testing room, he might have been going there because there's a thing in Pizza Simulator which suggests that Michael was sneaking out at night. And it's possible that he was sneaking out to the location where the nightmare animatronics were. And that William knew that's where he was sneaking off to, and he was pissed. So he sicked them on him just because he's a drunken, pissed bastard of a person. But, Michael fended them all off and was fine, so whatever. But I think the idea there was just sort of drive home, I want you to leave these fucking things alone. God fucking damn it, I will kill you. That's my interpretation, but regardless, whatever. So again, those three things are obviously watching that room, and there's a Fredbear plush. Exactly the same as the one that was on your bed in FNAF 4, and there's a walkie-talkie in the thing's arms, which seems to then indicate, backtracking once again, FNAF 4, that William had been talking to the younger child, the crying boy, the entire time through the Fredbear plush, and warning him to stay away from the animatronics. So he actually, and again, he told his daughter to stay away from Baby. They just didn't listen. So he's been trying to protect his family from his own bullshit this entire time, and it's just been failing tremendously due to one factor or another beyond his control, which isn't supposed to re-highlight him as potentially a good person that at least cares for his own family, because I think if he did, he'd have just not fucking been doing this to begin with. His motivations are still very unclear as far as the bigger picture is concerned. We just know this is the shit that he did. And presumably to some respects, because of what happened to his own children, he's more incentivized to keep fucking doing it just because he's a spiteful, vindictive motherfucker. Carrying on. I think that's the last bit of information that really matters from Sister Location. Other than, again, to see that, oh, hey, all these shiny looking toy-style animatronics are William Afton's design, not Henry's design, which seems to suggest that William more than likely designed the toy animatronics as well, and they were based off of the Circus Baby Pizza World animatronics, just migrated back to Freddy Fazbear designs, because he had to close down Circus Baby's stuff, because whoopsie doodles. I think we're down to Pizza Simulator now. I think I've covered all the silly middling plot points I can. I'm not sure. So FNAF 6, which was Pizza Simulator, which I said was the last game, the lore ending final game. I was wrong. Pizza Simulator, again, you wind up playing as Michael Afton, in the main game portions at least. The first initial cutscene that winds up happening, I think it's implied you're playing as someone else, and you probably got murder dead, and then Michael comes in after and does the rest of it. But the premise here is that you are the proud owner of your own Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. It's not implied where in the timeline it is, but it can be assumed based on the fact that Springtrap is there, and he's more deteriorated than he was in 3, that it's after FNAF 3. And this is the actual final chapter, as opposed to the lulls final chapter in FNAF 4. So this is the end of the timeline. Baby has obviously still been out there. At some point, she separated herself from the other animatronics she'd grouped up with just because they don't like her, and kicked her out because they finally figured out how to break her control. She goes and basically finds another version of her old body, puts herself back together. That's where she comes back in from. And then there's the Molten Freddy, I think it's called, which is just the rest of those Sister Location animatronics in a big fucking weird amalgamation of monstrous garbage, who wind up being the main 3 antagonists then. I don't think there was a 4th other than Lefty, and Lefty is their own thing, because Lefty is the puppet. Lefty is an animatronic with the puppet inside of them. I haven't talked about the puppet much anymore because, in spite of them seeming to be a very important part of the lore, they kind of just faded into the background after FNAF 2. Like, they were still relevant, but they didn't seem to do a lot in terms of the story, besides, as we further come to find out in Pizza Simulator, that they were the one responsible for effectively saving the children's souls and putting them back in the animatronics. At least the original 4 and possibly some of the others here and there, because she's trying to save them. It's clear that at this point several other souls are attached to animatronics purely because William found out that this was happening and was using the scooper in Sister Location to force this to happen, basically, for whatever god-awful bizarre reason he thought that was a good idea. Motivations not explained. So this is whatever, moving on. The instructions for the person running the pizzeria are every night to check outside, and if you find an animatronic there, bring it inside. Check it, and then let it be in the building, basically. They all then basically, and that's really your goal. Like you're supposed to be building up this pizzeria, and that's like part of the background stuff that goes on, and how you're managing it and everything, which makes it a weird and fun aspect of the game to mess with all this simulator stuff. But ultimately, the story is actually that this is all a trap. They've set up some sort of beacon to lure the animatronics to this location. You brought them inside, and they've climbed into the vent system. They're chasing the sounds of children. This location has never actually been open and in operation. It's all a setup. There have never been any children or patrons to your pizzeria. You have been setting all this stuff up for giggles in order to lure these remaining animatronics that haven't been otherwise destroyed or burnt down yet to this location so that they could all be trapped inside and burned alive. Even though I guess they're not technically living, but point of order, burned alive. And you find out that this was orchestrated by Henry. Coming back to Henry finally, who basically had all these regrets that he'd not done something sooner and let this all get out of hand. And he's basically making amends finally by putting an end to it. He, while you never see him, tells you that he is in the location with you, and he plans to die alongside all the rest of this. Just put a nail in that coffin once and all for all. Again, it is insinuated by the fact that he says there had, as far as the player themselves basically is concerned, there had been a plan for there to be an escape route to get you out. But he can see now from your apparent attachment to everything that he thinks that he gets the impression that this is where you want to be. And that would make sense because Michael would, again, his body's kind of fucked. He probably wants to die to begin with. But not before he's settled everything with his father, with his sister, who's still trapped in the baby animatronic, and put all the rest of this to rest. So Pizzeria Simulator basically ends with everyone dying, all the spirits being released, the animatronics destroyed, William goes to hell, and that's sort of it. The final screen is literally a set of tombstones of like the original 4-5 children that were murdered. One of them is facing away, which I'm pretty sure is Golden Freddy's, which they did just to leave that little bit of mystery. And then one in the very back, which I think is supposed to be William's, but it could just as well be Michael's. I don't know. There's a lot that can be drawn from that, especially since the names on the gravestones are like, I think are literally Mike, Jeremy, Fritz, which seems to imply that the false names Michael has been using for his employment in the previous games were all the names of the children that had died, and he was using them in like their memory or something. It's hard to say. It's also worth noting that the puppet and the girl that was haunting the puppet was Henry's daughter, and that's part of why he likely didn't do anything sooner, because he was overwhelmed with grief and couldn't deal. There's a cutscene that shows in Simulator that children being children locked the girl outside of the pizzeria one day. This security puppet that was supposed to be watching out for her was activated, finally got out of its thing because it had been blocked off by the children, so it couldn't get out of its box. Makes it out of its box, goes outside. It's raining. It's getting rained on. It's very quickly degrading and shutting down, but it finds the child before it completely shuts down and collapses on top of them. The child that it finds she's already dead. She is implied to be the first victim of the purple guy. He killed her outside the pizzeria. This also echoes a death minigame all the way back in FNAF 2, and effectively indicates the first murder the purple guy did was Henry's daughter. And due to the nature of the puppet breaking down and collapsing on top of her, she wound up possessing the puppet, and henceforth wound up trying to save all the other children who were killed by bringing them back to life inside of the other animatronics. And that's effectively the puppet story. It's inside Lefty because it was lured in there by Henry, who was trying to capture her so that, he could put his daughter to rest along with everybody else. Because while he appreciated that she was trying to save everyone, it was kind of making everything worse, obviously. I mean, you could probably argue that it's possible she was responsible for William coming back to life inside of the Springtrap suit. I don't know. That's difficult to say because we never see that happen. Is there anything else I'm missing from that mess? Oh my fucking god. There's so much to take in. There's another mini game that shows this girl playing a game, and she's clearly distraught over the loss of her dog. And at the end of the screenshot, where basically she finishes or loses the game she was playing, and is sitting there crying over this basically hallucinations of her dead dog, you see the Spring Bonnie suit behind her, indicating that this is probably the first of the 4 children that was led away to the back room by Springtrap, being like, hey, I've got your dog. He's fine. Come with me. You'll see. This kind of nonsense. I'm pretty sure that dialogue is actually in there somewhere. I just don't remember the exact dialogue. But he knew enough, had picked up enough that he knew the child was distraught and that he could manipulate her into following her because he's just a big friendly bunny. Spring Bonnie, I'm your friend. I can bring your dog back. Come with me into the back room. And he fucking murdered her. And due to something in Ultimate Custom Night, I think it's implied that the first child who died like that was stuffed into the Chica suit, because she has a line indicating she was the first of the actual 4 original animatronics to be possessed, which is interesting. Wouldn't have been my first choice, but hey, she was probably the biggest and least conspicuous to put something in, so yeah, I could see that. All right. Anyways, I think that's everything. I mean, there's the whole secret thing where Henry basically explains his plan, if you find it, before the actual end game. But, I mean, that's basically what I've already told you. The plan was to lure everybody there, trap them inside, and then burn it all down. And that's effectively the series. Now, Ultimate Custom Night exists. It doesn't really serve as a continuation of the story in any capacity, but there are a lot of implications in different parts, generally in death dialogues, and in one particular minigame you can wind up falling into. So I think Ultimate Custom Night is the only game in the series where you're actually not playing as Michael. I think you're playing as William in Ultimate Custom Night. And the implication is that Ultimate Custom Night is your personal fucking purgatory. That you are going to relive this nightmare that you have set upon everyone else for eternity. There's implications that this is partially due to Golden Freddy, who never got burned and is potentially still literally the one animatronic thing that would have and forced to be reckoned with in this series that is still potentially out there and hadn't been put to rest. And it's kind of implying that when it was time for William's soul to pass on, he basically was like, I don't think so, bitch. I'm going to torture you forever. Because the animatronics in their death commentaries, some of them have dialogues that basically say, well, some of them have dialogues where you can hear a second person talking behind the normal voice that sounds like a child's voice. And occasionally you'll see a child's face pop up on screen, usually when you die. But it's hard to see unless you're really fucking looking for it. And it's implied that that's Golden Freddy, again. and it's implied that through the dialogues, the one you shouldn't have killed, which I think is where people have then been pulling this back to FNAF 4 and saying, oh, the one you shouldn't have killed being the crying child who was on life support and would have lived until you pulled the plug on him. Like, this is the one you shouldn't have killed. That seems to be the implication at this point. So it's his own youngest son now tormenting him in the afterlife and not letting him move on in any capacity. Though one of the cutscenes does suggest that you are being told by Old Man Consequences, which is a thing pulling you all the way back to FNAF World, which again makes that suddenly relevant again, which just, all right, sure, I don't even. And the ending of that scene is you like walking into this pool of water that Old Man Consequences fishes out of, and as you do so, your body goes white as you're passing into this area, and then you just fall through, and that whole falling through forever scene from FNAF World basically repeats. And the implication there seems to be like this sort of like baptism type moment where Golden Freddy is washing himself clean of everything and finally moving on. So I think the implication is that after tormenting William for X amount of time, he finally accepts that, he should just move on and does so, which I guess would then close out Golden Freddy's storyline. And that wraps up everything. And William continues, I think, to just continue living out that hell for eternity anyways, because he fucking deserves it. But Golden Freddy at least kind of moves on. And I guess that's it. I think that's finally it. I know he's possibly going to make a game sometime in the future called FNAF Into Madness, but I think that's going to be a FNAF World type of deal with just like some mini games and things of that nature, which hopefully won't have any major lore implications, so I have to come back and fucking do this again. But I think that's everything. So let me backtrack. So the actual timeline is FNAF 4, Sister Location, FNAF 2, FNAF 1, FNAF 3, Pizza Simulator, Ultimate Custom Night. There we go. That's the actual fucking timeline, which is why it makes talking about all this shit so fucking convoluted, because like you want to start being like, okay, well, when you said like, all right, first game, all right, well, I can tell you about the first game, but I know all this shit that already came after it now, so I know what's actually happening versus the little piece that we actually know at the time. And good God, and it all just basically circles back around to William Afton and the purple guy, William Afton. This entire story revolves around that guy and his actions and him being an asshole and him paying for it. Ultimately, it's a wild fucking ride. I think that's all of it, though. Was that fucking all of it? I hope that explains everything, because my voice is dying and I don't want to talk about this anymore. Thanks for listening. I seriously do really enjoy this series. I mean, I know I got frustrated here and there in explaining this all, but it's a nice series. The story is convoluted and hidden in everything, and it requires a lot of processing. I hope this helped at all. This has been Uncle Sefra's Storytime. Peace the fuck out.